Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining this webinar. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about how networking teams can do more with less, with kind of a focus on people, really, because we know that that's a really big challenge for all of us these days is hiring and talent and keeping talent and growing teams. So we're going to kind of talk about some of those topics, and I'll kind of throw in a little bit about how Juniper Networks can help you with that. So to start, my name is Scott Snedden. I'm a senior director focused on data center networking at Juniper. I've been with Juniper for all told, maybe 12 years or so, 11 years, with a couple of stints at a couple of other companies, some software-defined networking startups and the like. So if you've seen me speak before, I thank you, and I thank you for tuning in again. But yeah, I focus on data center networking and primarily what Juniper's doing with Apstra, which was a relatively recent acquisition in 2021 that brought us some capabilities around intent-based networking and automation, sort of expanding on what Juniper's doing around automation. So to talk a little bit about the data center landscape and how we see it, things are getting complicated. We all know this. Data center networks are hard. They can be complex. The architectures are oftentimes bespoke and custom for each application. So operating those environments becomes really, really difficult. Understanding how that data center network operates from day to day is challenging for teams. Oftentimes, the knowledge of the network and how it operates exists in the mind of one or two engineers and isn't necessarily documented well. You don't necessarily always have that single source of truth of knowledge that is accessible to additional engineers, right? That single source of truth is usually in the mind of a guy or two. And we all know that that's the reality. And then you start to add cloud and the complexity of the application environment that's running on top of that data center network. And the complexity problem is just exacerbating. We got to do things fast. Businesses are moving quickly. Changes are happening rapidly. The demand on the network team to keep up with those changes is higher and higher all the time. We have to do things quickly. We have to automate to be able to keep up with that need for speed. There's also the factor of the data center network itself needs to be faster. That's well understood. Things are moving from 10 to 100 to 400 gig really quickly. And so you need to build your networks to be able to keep up with that demand for speed. But really, I think more impactfully, we need to focus on how our teams can keep up with the rapidly changing environment. We're all living through supply chain issues. I work for a vendor. We're living through it on our side. You as customers, I'm sure, are just pulling your hair out, trying to get gear and how you manage through that. And then we're all constrained, even through all of this, even through the growth and the rapidly growing business and the need for change. You got to do more with less. Budgets are shrinking. The network isn't necessarily getting the funding that it may get in some businesses. If I think of a service provider, the network is the business, and so oftentimes the network will be very well funded because the business that you're delivering to your customers as a service provider is networking. So the funding for that might be different than an enterprise. If you're a retail enterprise type of environment, you're selling goods to end users. You're not selling network services to end users. So oftentimes the budgets for networking are an afterthought or are pretty low on the totem pole compared to other things. And so you're always asked to do more with less, hiring more people. Even if you have funding to hire more people, finding talent, finding people, training people to effectively operate that complex data center environment is extremely difficult. And so I'm actually going to talk mostly about these constraints today and what you can do to address some of that and what you can do to kind of think about your hiring strategies a little bit differently. I gave a webinar maybe a year ago or so, and I talked about the Great Resignation. That term Great Resignation has sort of fallen out of popularity. And the industry is largely talking about this as a great reshuffling. We can't deny that over the last several years, a lot of people have changed jobs. People have transitioned. People have had the opportunity to rethink their personal priorities. And maybe being a network engineer doesn't fit in those personal priorities. So we've lost people. People have left tech. The other thing that's happening is that the competitive landscape is different with the acceptance of remote work so widely over the last few years, people are hiring in different locales than they used to. So that's becoming different. So these are just kind of throwing out some figures and things that we've seen from some analysts talking about this staffing crisis, and that staffing talent shortage is really going to stick with us for a while. And so we as IT leaders, we as networking teams probably need to maybe approach our hiring and team building and team maintaining practices a little bit differently. Like I said, remote work has really changed the landscape for how we manage people, how we hire, how we recruit. Your best network engineer is absolutely being recruited by a web scale company, right? I live on a coast. I live in the Silicon Valley, and I've known for decades, really, that the competitive landscape here is different than other parts of the world. I'd go talk to a customer in the Midwest, and they're not necessarily competing for talent with Amazon like we do here in the Silicon Valley. Well, that's all changed. With remote work, those web scale companies, those companies with the big budgets and the really attractive recruiting efforts are coming after your best people. And so you've got to really consider that the competitive landscape for hiring has changed and made keeping people even more difficult than it ever was before. We have to face facts that a lot of us with experience in the technologies of the past are aging out. The CCIEs of the world are becoming senior and are probably thinking about the next phase of their careers or the next phase of their lives. And we're probably going to be facing a lot of retirement in our expert network engineer population. And frankly, new college grads and young people coming into the industry, they're not studying network engineering. They're focused on other topics like cloud practitioner. They're studying computer science and going into programming and writing code. And so the pool of people that we can draw from to hire network engineers is shrinking, not just in the competitive way, but there just aren't as many network engineers coming into the business. And so what all this says is you're not always going to have data center experts to operate that expert data center. That expert, bespoke, customized data center environment that you've built out of necessity over the last 10, 15, 20 years, well, it takes experts to operate, and those experts just aren't going to be there. And so we need to think differently about how we approach data center networking, not just to take advantage of new technology, not just to go fast and keep up, but to address this talent shortage, to address this problem we have with just not having experts available to us. So what should you do? I've got 3 things that I think you should focus on. The first is to simplify your environment. Move away from that bespoke custom architecture that you've got operating into standard cookie cutter building blocks. You need to automate. We all know that this is key to doing more with less. Tesla couldn't build the number of cars that they have if they didn't have a extremely automated assembly line. I mean, this historically is a well-known approach to addressing the need for speed, to addressing the need for doing more with less, is you've got to automate, but you've got to do it intelligently and you've got to do it carefully. Expecting a network engineer that doesn't have a background in computer science to suddenly learn how to write code, well, that's probably not going to be successful. And so you need to adopt an automation practice, but you need to do it carefully. You need to do it with tools that enable you, and you need to leverage talent outside of the network engineering org, which brings me to that last point. Hire those cloud practitioners. I like to think that if you're hiring a network engineer, you're probably going to look for 3 things. You're going to look for somebody with some skills in network engineering. You're going to look for somebody with the aptitude and personality that makes you confident that they can learn and adapt to your environment. And you probably want to look for somebody in this modern era that understands more than just network engineering, that understands cloud applications and cloud architectures, because that's going to be really important to how IT operates, is understanding cloud, right? So if I think of their network engineering skills, their people skills, their soft skills, and their cloud skills, heck, if I can find 2 out of 3, I think that that's a good hire. And so knowing what we know about losing expertise in networking and data center, so maybe look for people that have cloud practitioner certs that have an understanding of how an AWS environment operates and clearly can demonstrate the aptitude to learn. And then you can teach them those network engineering skills. So don't rule out a possible new hire because they didn't write BGP on their resume. Maybe look for those other skills and think about what those skills can bring to your networking team. So, the first point, I'm going to kind of step through those 3 items there that I just talked about. On the topic of simplification, we advocate that you modernize your data center footprint. The physical architectures, the physical systems that are running can no longer be bespoke, can no longer be single vendor proprietary solutions that only support a given application and can't effectively be reused across other applications. So the way the industry is really converging on supporting this is technology called EVPN VXLAN, CLO fabric, data center fabric architectures. These are simple cookie cutter approaches to data center architectures that allow you to build small to medium to massive using the same building blocks. So then when you think about operating those environments, you have a consistent methodology to operate any data center environment so long as they comply with this sort of cookie cutter building block approach. This is how Facebook and Amazon and Microsoft operate their massive data centers. They're using fabric technology, IP routing technology, and then EVPN VXLAN as an overlay to accommodate those bespoke applications without changing the fundamental building blocks of the network. So this is the way to build data centers. There's a lot of information out there. I would be thrilled if you reached out to Juniper to learn more about data center fabrics and EVPN VXLAN, because we are experts in this topic and can help you with that. But there is a wealth of information out there to help you learn about what a data center fabric is and what I mean by EVPN VXLAN. Now, the reality is, especially in enterprise environments, finding skilled people to support you in that EVPN VXLAN deployment might be challenging. That aging, gray-haired CCIE probably knows an awful lot about 3-tiered data center architectures and spanning tree and OSPF. I've got skills in that area myself. They might not be abreast of the most modern IP fabric technologies. So look to tools to help you with that. Juniper has a tool called Apstra that I mentioned before that is intended to be that easy button automation tool for that EVPN VXLAN environment. There are others on the market as well. Second, think about automation. I talked about automation. I talked about the need to, one of the key things to do more with less is to automate those things that you do every day. But step 1 of any automation journey is to capture and understand that single source of truth. I mentioned early on, one of the challenges that we have in the business, in the industry, is that the single source of truth of your network, the document for your network, lives in the mind of 1 or 2 people, maybe in a handful of spreadsheets and on a whiteboard. But if I walked into a new shop as a new hire and said, "Hey, great, I'm glad to be here. Show me your network document so I can start to learn how your network operates," well, you probably don't have a document that you can effectively share with that person. Let's be honest, your documentation sucks. It just does. And so the reason your documentation sucks is because documenting sucks. People don't want to do it. It's hard. It's tedious. So look to tools to help you with that. One of the values of this Apstra solution that Juniper is positioning is that it is the tool that you use to design and deploy your network. So it's capturing that single source of truth into a digital format from day 1, from day 0, as you're designing your network environment. So that single source of truth is created as you go. It is drawn out of the mind of that engineer as you create and define the network service. And then it's self-documenting as you deploy. So when that new hire comes on board and says, "Can I see your document?" the answer is, "Well, let me show you how to use the tool." And the tool is the document. It is the single source of truth. And then you have something that can translate to your next new hire and your next new hire. And also, it's not super complicated. So if that new hire engineer doesn't speak BGP, Well, that's okay, because the tool is going to help them through the processes that they'll need to adopt to make changes to that network without needing to understand a vendor-specific CLI or a vendor-specific implementation of data center fabric. So start from that single source of truth, start from a practice that is validating your deployments and then automating your deployments using a very careful methodology that doesn't break things as you go. We've all heard stories about, automating bad just propagates bad. If you make manual changes and you make an error in your methodology in that manual change, well, that error is usually detected pretty quickly, because you probably broke something while you were typing. If your automation methodology is flawed and you push something into the network that isn't validated, that isn't checked as you go, well, that small problem suddenly becomes a very large problem. So your automation practice needs to include validation. I spent time with an engineer from AWS a couple of weeks ago at an event, and he talked about, this sort of NetOps, infrastructure as a code 2.0, where we in the industry have worked hard to build automated practices and build automation, but we've not necessarily focused on codifying the validation and the testing process. And so as you're thinking about automation practices, you need to factor in automated validation and testing as part of that deployment automation, or you're just, propagating bad more quickly. So, we've got a lot of thoughts here at Juniper on how to do that and what the tools are that you need to do that. I'll talk about a couple in a moment. And then the next thing that I think we really need to do, and this starts to get into how we hire those cloud practitioners and how we look to sort of revamping our teams, we need to rethink our practices. We need to rethink our processes. I've seen a lot of environments where people have developed a really strong infrastructure as code practice within their business, but the network team is frankly left out of the conversation. You're going to probably have teams within your environment who are really good at deploying applications from top to bottom in public cloud that can set up a new environment, create all the networking context needed for that environment, and deploy that application in minutes on a public cloud footprint. But then if they try to do the same thing in your private cloud, well, they've probably got tools to do the server stuff really well. Maybe they're using VMware or Kubernetes or something, and they can create that application environment, the server environment, and even the storage environment in a fully automated, codified way. But then the network team is still a trouble ticket away. And if they need change on the network, well, that's a manual process, or maybe it's an automated notification to a Slack channel or something, but it's not an automated end-to-end workflow. It's an automated notification, and then somebody from the networking team has to pick up the ball and go get that done. So when I say rethink operations, I'm talking about integrating the networking workflows into those infrastructure as a code workflows, into those DevOps workflows, presenting the network as a service, much in the same way a public cloud environment includes the network as their service. And so when I say rethink operations, I'm talking again about that infrastructure as a code 2.0, where validation and testing is a part of the process, but also I'm talking about, hey, network team, get a seat at the table with the application team and understand the demands for that private data center and work together with that application team to build automated workflows that fit with their requirements so that the trouble ticket process is removed from the equation. So the call a guy and wait 3 days for them to provision a VLAN no longer becomes a part of the process, but instead that VLAN is created automatically as part of an end-to-end automated workflow. Getting into the sort of commercial aspect of the session here right now, we at Juniper Networks approach this using a tool we call Apstra. Apstra was a startup, Silicon Valley startup that Juniper acquired in 2021 that brings us an intent-based networking solution. Apstra created this intent-based networking term in briefing some analysts when they were first starting out, that term was coined. A lot of other vendors have been using this intent-based networking term in their marketing materials for a little while as well. But we really stand behind the fact that we invented intent-based networking. Now, what is intent-based networking? Intent-based networking is simply stepping back from the machine-driven process of defining your network by configuring devices, and instead defining your network using a set of terms that declares what the network service is or needs to look like. So declaring that intent is really the process of designing a network service. From a high-level perspective, I need to connect applications A, B, and C with these characteristics. And I'm going to use these sort of numbering schemes and methods to create that service. So declaring the intent before I go into the build and deploy process. And so what we do with Apstra is we give you a tool to capture that intent or define what the network service needs to look like through a design phase. And we've got some GUI-driven approaches to doing that. Then we enter into the build phase where we start to take that declared intent of what a network needs to look like and match that to infrastructure. So in the build phase, we're taking that design and we're associating it with racks and switch types and definitions of network infrastructure. Because I've used a tool to design and declare the build of that network, now I have a document that clearly defines what the network is supposed to be. I can spit that document out in the form of an Excel spreadsheet and hand it to an installer and instruct them to go cable the data center based on that build sheet that can be generated from Apstra. Then once that data center is stood up and the switches are plugged in and connected, I move to the deploy phase. And what Apstra will do is take that declared environment and convert it to that machine code, convert it to those CLI terms that are applicable for Juniper or Arista or Cisco or Dell EMC running Sonic. We can create the configurations and push those onto the device, so delivering that automated deployment process. And then we're doing this in a validated manner. We're checking that design and build, and we're checking that deployment as we go, validating that things get deployed correctly. And then we get into this system where we can then monitor the operation of the environment. So as part of the Apstra solution, we've got a set of probes and data collection and analytics that run on the network and compare the operating state against that single source of truth or against that living digital document of your network. So it becomes an operations tool and a troubleshooting tool. It becomes a monitoring tool and an alarming tool. So you use this tool to design, build, and deploy. And then going on, you use this tool to monitor and operate the network and implement any change that needs to happen. And you do all that in a validated fashion that's constantly checking. So, we're the only management system on the platform that delivers that entire lifecycle process. There are others that dabble in areas. All of the others on the market do it in a proprietary fashion and will only work with that vendor's hardware. We are the only multi-vendor solution that does anything like this as well, with, of course, support for Juniper hardware, but also Arista and Cisco and the Sonic ecosystem with Dell EMC. We've also got some really powerful operational integrations with VMware. So if you've got a VMware environment, we've got some plugins that will allow the VMware operator to have visibility and be able to automate network services. And we have through that plugin, we have the inverse where the network operator can visualize where virtual machines are, where virtual networks are, whether it be a vSphere or an NSXT environment, and can make sure that network services are aligned. And when there are mismatches or variances, those alarms are bubbled up and operators are given advice on where to go to troubleshoot issues. We've also got a really powerful set of tooling around Ansible and a brand new one down at the bottom there. That's why the icon is sort of standing out on its own. We've got some new Terraform integration that's just been introduced in the last few days. And so, to that end, as I think about bringing in the network team with my IT services a little more holistically, what I encourage you to do is to work with your DevOps teams, work with your application teams, and understand the tooling that they are using, and then present your network services to them using their language. Terraform is a really popular end-to-end automation tool that's widely used across the industry to operate all kinds of application environments across public clouds and in private data centers. And so with this new Terraform provider that we've published for Juniper Apstra, this is on the HashiCorp Terraform website. You can go download this. It is a formal approved Terraform provider. You can start to present your network as a service to a Terraform-based workflow. We can also do this with Ansible. We can also do this with some of the VMware integration that I mentioned before. I just want to highlight this Terraform framework as a new item that we've just introduced, a very, very exciting and powerful one to allow you to present your network as a service into your application environment more effectively. Also, back to that topic of hiring those cloud practitioners, in general, those cloud practitioners are going to have expertise in these languages and can come and help contribute to your network team to help build this sort of integrated automation. Using Juniper Apstra below that makes that automation a lot simpler, because I'm presenting a single API to that larger framework representing an entire network, rather than asking an application team to understand your network topology and know which switches to automate to. This is a very simple way to plug into a higher level automation environment. And then we've got some proof points around Apstra and how it's had a positive effect on a lot of businesses. Juniper made the acquisition of Apstra a couple of years ago now. We've got a lot of customers under our belt that are happily using Apstra to automate their environment. And then Apstra was a standalone company for a few years before the acquisition. So there is a long history of customers showing success using this tool to operate their environment. We worked with Forrester in 2022 to do a total economic impact study. That study is available on the Juniper website. I encourage you to take a look at it, but it quantifies some of the return on investment that we've seen. It quantifies some of the savings in time and process that customers have been able to realize using the Apstra tool. And it also gets into some anecdotal things about cost savings by eliminating licenses. We've got examples of customers who have moved away from Cisco ACI as a operations tool, keeping their Cisco network Nexus switches in place. So they're still operating their Nexus switching environment, but are using Apstra instead of ACI as the operation tool. And they're seeing a huge savings in license and maintenance costs over keeping that ACI license alive. So, a lot of really valuable measured results that we can show for Apstra in any environment, not just a Juniper hardware-based environment. And then I want to leave you with some advice on what people can focus on and what you can do with those people. So, one of the conversations that always tends to come up when we talk about automation is, well, what are your network engineers going to do if you effectively implement an automated environment? If your engineers are spending all of their time provisioning VLANs and you eliminate the need for them to provision VLANs all day long, well, what do? Are you going to fire them all? No, I don't want you to fire them all. These are very valuable, very smart, talented people. I want you to repurpose them and use them more effectively. And so, when I think about what an effective technical team looks like, well, included in that team is mentorship. Included in that team is allyship and technical community and the ability to learn and share from your peers. And when you're hiring new college grads, they want that. They want leadership and mentorship from senior team members to show them the way. I had that when I was a young engineer, and I really cherish and value the relationships I built with the people that were senior to me when I was getting started. And I would have never become the network engineer that I became without a guy at the phone company showing me how to punch down wires in a cable closet, right? That knowledge and foundational understanding of how networks worked was invaluable. And it's on us, the senior engineers, to share that information and not just sit at a cubicle or in an office with the door closed, punching away at the keyboard, fixing VLAN problems all day. And so one of the really valuable things we can do is teach and share and provide a path for young engineers to come into the industry. Another thing that I'm struck with often, and I think about all the time, is I was talking to a tech blogger who's running a very popular, tech website. I talked to him several years ago, and at the time he was really struggling with the business aspect of keeping this blogging and podcasting website running. And I asked him, "Why are you doing this?" Because he had a day job. He was a network engineer for a large enterprise, but was trying to get this other thing off the ground. And I just asked him straight up, "Why? Why are you doing this?" And he told me something that I'll never forget. He said, "The best way to become an expert on a topic is to share it with somebody else. You can practice and learn and take classes and use those skills yourselves, and you'll have a good, solid understanding of those skills. But to really take it to the next level and fully understand what you're doing, you need to write about it. You need to talk about it. You need to teach others how to do this." As a side, I'm actually studying to be a yoga teacher outside of the tech business. And one of my teachers shared this little sort of anecdote that said a new teacher teaches for others and practices for themselves, but a experienced teacher practices for their students and teaches for themselves. And the way I took that is, as you get experience sharing information, you actually learn more by sharing than by doing. So back to what I said before, doing will help you understand, but to truly master a topic, you need to share it with others. And what I've seen is sharing with others becomes more rewarding than just keeping a network up and running and doing your job at the bare minimum. So I encourage you to mentor and teach, build those technical communities. And then the other really positive side effect that businesses can realize is those really smart network engineers that are heads down putting out fires all day, they can actually work on hard business challenges. As IT leaders, we know we have all kinds of projects that we've been ignoring for a long time because we just haven't had time to focus on them. Well, we can incent and guide and leverage those engineers to work on things that might be peripheral to the network itself. And that could have a really positive impact on the business. So, when I think about doing more with less, I think about people, and I think about leveraging those people more effectively and leveraging those people to improve your company and improve your environment. You can do that with teaching, with building technical communities, and with tackling hard business challenges using the talent that you have in-house. And if you create this culture, you're going to create a more attractive environment that people are going to want to come to. And those new college grads with those cloud certifications, they might not want to take that offer from that cloud scale company, that web scale company. They might want to come for work for your enterprise because you've built a culture that is attractive. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. I really appreciate you spending the time with me today. And please reach out through juniper.net if you have want any further information on any of these topics. Thanks.